All children start out naturally curious and love to learn. When they are sent to school, instead of learning, it is a repeated process of memorizing and regurgitating information. The better you are at regurgitating this information, the better you will do in the school system. The real education is obeying authority. We are taught to ask permission. We are taught not to think outside the box. We are taught multiculturalism, drug, sex, and death education. We are taught to memorize, regurgitate information, an input-output process not unlike a computer or a slave. We are taught to respond to a bell, just like a factory floor. We are taught to keep our head down and just make it through the day. We are taught to lower our expectations, and that is just school. Outside of school, our communication is destroyed as people literally lose the ability to speak and relate to one another. Our financial education is one of slaves encouraging debt. Our political system is one of false choices. Our media is normalizing narcissistic behavior. We are not taught to develop critical thinking. We are not taught about debt-based money and the principles that our founding fathers fought for. We are not taught to cooperate and view each other as a team with individual talents and gifts. We are not taught to question authority or even the facts demanded of us. We are indoctrinated, not educated. Indoctrinated like little slaves. The secret of American schooling is that it does not teach the way children learn, nor is it supposed to. Schools were conceived to serve the economy and the social order rather than the kids and the families. That is why it's compulsory. As a consequence, the school cannot help anybody grow up, because its prime directive is to retard maturity. It does it by teaching that everything is difficult, that other people run our lives, that our neighbors are untrustworthy and even dangerous. School is the first impression children get of society. Because first impressions are often the most decisive ones, school imprints kids with fear, suspicion of one another, and certain addictions for life. It ambushes natural intuition, faith, and love of adventure, wiping these out in favor of gospel of rational procedure and rational management. Between 1906 and 1920, a handful of world-famous industrialists and financiers together in their own private foundations handpicked university administrators, House politicians, and spent more attention and more money towards forced schooling than the national government did. Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller spent more money than the government did between 1900 and 1920 on education. The system of modern schooling was constructed outside of the public eye and outside the public's representatives. In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions of intellectual and character education fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people, or any of their children, into philosophers or men of science. We have not to raise up them as authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, all of whom we have ample supply of. The task is simple. We will organize the children and teach them in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. John D. Rockefeller. The aim of public education is not to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train standardized citizenry, to put down dissidence and originality. That is the aim of the United States. H. L. Mencken. This lowest common denominator citizen is most useful in a corporate, military, or a welfare state. Corporations, governments, and militaries do not deal with dissent effectively, so it is in their best interest not to have participants that question anything. When I joined the Marine Corps, they didn't beat around the bush about this idea. In boot camp, they wanted instant and willing obedience to orders. Everywhere else in your life, you will learn the same lesson, only more subtly, and this is why military men are most sought for corporate jobs. Education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking and acting otherwise than their schoolmasters would have wished. Bertrand Russell. Our education system is centered on an input-output process of information. Our success or failure depends on our efficiency of taking what the teacher tells us and then regurgitating that same information onto an exam. Those that are able to blindly regurgitate information the best are rewarded with higher grades. They are told that they are smart, when in fact they are just thoroughly indoctrinated. This input-output process is no different than a computer or what a slave does. You give it a command, and it just does it, without question. This system was carefully created to mold us into what we are today. The masses blindly flow through this education system and naturally fit into centralized systems that want good, little, obedient workers who take orders without question. We all know that person who is very smart, or indoctrinated, that excels in a corporation, military, or government job, and yet they lack any real street smarts to see what's really going on in their lives. When you understand that their mind only functions on what they are told, it becomes clear to you that they are only able to be successful in a centralized system where taking orders is a way of life. I think, therefore I am. It is a classical philosophical statement on human consciousness and existence. But what about the people who do not really think? Do they really exist? This input-output mindset is reinforced outside of school and the career world. Our society is all about what is popular. From early on in our lives, we are pressured into doing what's popular and not what's best for you. This is a way a collective gets individuals to sacrifice what is unique and special about themselves, to become the lowest common denominator in a group that really doesn't care about you at all. The most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is born in the mind constantly. You must confine itself to a few points and repeat it to them over and over again. Joseph Goebbels. When you look at our news or political debate, it is driven by talking points where they're repeated with such accuracy it's scary.
Talk show host Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be able to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television. Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on his late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television. Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night TV.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope once again on late-night TV.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien is looking to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night TV. Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope on late-night television.
Conan O'Brien may be about to push the envelope.
If this works for late-night TV, what else could this be good for?
And make no mistake about it, if and once Saddam has nuclear weapons, the terror network will have nuclear weapons.
Terrorist. It's the third time I've said that. I'll probably say it 3 more times, see? Terrorist. In my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again.
Nuclear weapons. Clear weapon.
For the truth to sink in.
That we have America.
To kind of catapult the propaganda.
Nuclear weapons. Nuclear bombs. Nuclear weapons. Nuclear bombs. Nuclear 100 nuclear bombs. Nuclear bombs. Nuclear arsenal. Nuclear tinder bombs. Nuclear know-how without nuclear infrastructure. Bombs.
Tool of terror.
And a countdown.
Torture.
To a potential nuclear nightmare.
To kind of catapult the propaganda.
The first atomic bomb on Hiroshima killed, burned, and maimed 194,000 people.
Intellectual debate in this society somehow passes for those who can scream their talking points the loudest over the other. This is done purposely to get a confrontational, emotional reaction from the indoctrinated, and to dissuade the logical and independent thinker from even entering the debate.
No, we're not occupiers. That's the same anti-Semitic argument we've heard over and over again. No, that's the same anti-Semitic argument we've heard over and over and over again. Look,
when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic.
Through this process, the collective is intellectually safe from any challenge to its power. Do your thoughts serve to free you, or simply to make you freely serve? These talking points are created by people who do think about how to control societies. They weave this input-output slave thought into an Hegelian dialectic that they control. They essentially have a society that bickers over issues that have no real importance on the real power of the world. They use hot-button, emotional issues like abortion or gays in the military to divide and conquer us, while they laugh all the way to the bank, march us off to the war, and destroy our Constitution. What about those of us who did not do well in this indoctrination environment? I was one of those kids that did not do very well in school. I knew from a very early age that what was being pumped into my head was not what was going to make me a better person. I knew that the most successful people that I knew did not have jobs or went along with the crowd, yet our school teaches us to get jobs and do what we were told. I knew that our school system wanted me to learn about sex, drugs, death, multiculturalism, much more than issues that would have driven my success like economics, history, and psychology. They wanted me to drone on senseless and boring topics instead of inspiring me to a higher, better self through art, music, and philosophy. What they were really teaching me was to keep my head down and deal with their system. These days, those that are restless in this indoctrination environment run the risk of being drugged. Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably the reason why so few engage in it. Henry Ford. One of the greatest challenges to becoming totally free is to be able to think independently from everyone else. You know instinctively no one cares about you as much as you care about yourself. Yet we constantly listen to others about what is best for us instead of thinking about what is best for us. That is because we live in a world where everybody tells you what to think, but no one tells you how to think. We are blasted every day with advertising, financial sales pitches.
Sometimes you wish people didn't agree with you all the time. At MF Global, we tell you what's good for you.
Political media propaganda, religious dictates, and more social pressure to conform. Most of our lives we do not make any real decisions. We just kind of fall into a routine. You see, when you really don't think, you leave your mind open to people who do think. The real and most often unnoticed danger is a class of predators manipulating societies for their own selfish benefits. If you go along to get along and not think outside of the box, you risk being caught in the undertow of a doomed society or worse. There is a lot of money and power derived off of having a sucker born every day. Our elite molds societies by educating people just enough to run the machine, but never enough to ask if this is the best machine for us. Think about it. Our controlled school system teaches sex, drugs, and multiculturalism in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, and not even how to balance a checkbook by high school. The elite system wants utterly dependent people to control for power and profit. They do not want fully aware people who can see through the mainstream media lies, the Wall Street Ponzi schemes, or federal abuses. They certainly do not want people educating others to our common plight of this illusion. Do your thoughts serve to free you, or simply to make you freely serve? Your thoughts are not your own. If you ever wonder why Americans are broke, depressed, and lifeless, look no further than whose thoughts they are thinking. If they are listening to the elite's financial con men, they are constantly stripped of their wealth through a myriad of schemes.
You can't create yourself an impression that a stock's down. But you do it anyway because the SEC doesn't understand it. So, okay, Peter writes, should I be worried about Bear Stearns in terms of liquidity and get my money out of there? No, no, no. Bear Stearns is fine.
I know you've been talking about it. It's financials led by Bear Stearns after what essentially is a bailout from the Fed. Bear Stearns shares are down 90% this morning.
If they're listening to the elite's mainstream media, they're depressed about the national problems because they're too big and the experts say that there's no hope, or worse, hope is coming someday. If they're listening to the elite's medical community, they're hooked on psychotropic drugs. They will never get their fire back by tackling their life's challenges. The elite give us the illusion of freedom, but control all of the choices. The elite give us the choice of 500 cable stations, and yet the same message comes from every one of those channels. They give us aisles and aisles of food, and yet 90% of it is just corn and soy byproducts. They give us a choice of hundreds of political candidates, yet nothing changes because both sides are bought and paid for by the elite. They give you the choice of investment of stocks, bonds, and real estate. But when this all goes down, you will see that it's all part of the same illusion of the dollar. This paradigm is controlled by the elite, and if you don't think independently for yourselves, you cannot help but to be controlled, whether you know it or not. Every aspect of your life is monitored, regulated, taxed, and controlled, not for your betterment, but for the betterment of others. To do most high-paying jobs requires a certification or a license. That's a form of control. Most assets that you have or own outright are not yours. Try not paying property taxes on a home that you own outright, and I'll show you who the real owner is. All your communications are monitored and recorded. Now the federal government wants these records to be kept indefinitely. Do you think you own your 401k? Try getting your money out. Or how about the stocks that you own outright? The fact is, the DTCC, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, owns all of the stocks that are traded. If you want to do anything to your home, you better get permission from the homeowner association or the local zoning board. All these examples, plus many, many more, have nothing to do with making your life better. They exist to create power, profit, and a parasitic life for somebody else. Let's take a more detailed look at this. Our entire life is a rigged game designed to keep us down. We are fed consumerism, taught that we have no purpose, taught to obey, medicated with alcohol or drugs. Early pregnancy is glorified. Poor diets with fast food. Because of a poor education, people have a lack of vision. We have unhealthy relationships. We're entertained and not really educated. Divorce is a huge setback for many people. With this economy, we're faced with dead-end jobs. An entitlement mentality. We were trained to work for the government. People are saddled with credit card debt, auto debt, mortgage debt, student debt. People are driven to attain worthless diplomas, to become licensed professionals. And once they find some sort of success, they're marked with progressive taxation. They could become a legal target. If they create a business, they're forced to deal with increasing regulations and scrutiny. And then after they're all done, they're faced with the death tax. And regardless of what level of society that you're at, you're faced with federal debt, state debt, local debt, corporate bailouts, weak economy, bank failures, energy dependence, inflation, outsourced jobs, wars, political distractions, illegal immigrants, propaganda, popping of asset bubbles, genetically modified food, cancer, rising health insurance, and most dangerous of all, other ignorant people. At the root of all these traps, there is an elite that has created, perpetuated, and profited off of this reality. And yet if people were truly to see how the world functions, they would see that the elite are unnecessary, along with their traps. There are 7 billion people in this world. It is crazy to think that less than 10,000 people control this paradigm. Yet this is only possible when the elite convince the 7 billion people that they need the elite and the institutions that they run. Our problems start and stop with us. We are stronger than they are, and they know it. They lack any personal or relationship skills to work with others without the threat of force. Their most powerful weapon is the lie that they convince us to believe. Start seeing the world as it is and think for yourself. We are constantly told what to think and not how to think. There is a very easy way out of this slave mentality we have been taught, and it is called logic. You might have heard of something called a classical education. A classical education is created on the firm foundation of the trivium: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar is the observation of symbols or situations. Logic is using reason to understand what is the most likely outcome and how to best position yourself for that outcome. Rhetoric is the ability to relate to others what you observed, how you logically thought about it, and to be able to defend your conclusions to others questioning your ideas. The most dangerous man to any government is a man who is able to think things out for himself without regard to prevailing superstitions or taboos. H.L. Mencken. This trivium was the basis for all other education. If you were able to process information through the trivium, you could learn anything, and more importantly, you would love learning. Did you ever wonder why our founding fathers were able to speak multiple languages and to excel in vastly different areas like architecture and philosophy? It is because they had a strong foundation in the trivium. Since these men loved learning, they did not ever stop learning. They continued to read and study up until their final days. This classical education led to a fertile ground of educational thought that gave rise to the American society that threw off the shackles of a collectivist tyranny for the simple principle of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Children are innately curious, and they use their logic to understand how the world works. The reason why kids are constantly into everything is that they're learning how things work. Over time, they learn that if they drop a glass, it will break. If you ever wonder why your kid's depressed at school, it is probably because they know that they're being indoctrinated into being a slave, and on some level they know it. If you wonder why your kids don't like you, it's not because they don't really like you, they just don't want to end up like you. Dead-end job, poor relationships, poor money situation. In our society, we are taught to hate education and avoid it after school. Our society makes it real easy to be ignorant, and even subsidizes the behavior. What luck for rulers that men do not logically think. Adolf Hitler. This three-step process is vastly different from the input-output process of our current education system. That key step of logical thought is totally devoid in our educational system. If we were taught logic, we would cause all sorts of problems for a system that relies on blind obedience to orders. When I was in the Marine Corps, they were very bold in their indoctrination process of me. They wanted instant and willing obedience to orders. But our schools, our corporations, and governments can't be so bold, so they just want you to be a quote-unquote team player. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is your freedom. Viktor Frankl. While this logical thought is bad for a collectivist system, it is the key to happiness and success for an individual. Using logic allows the individual to rationally and unemotionally process what is being presented to them. There they can determine what is being presented to them, if it's good for them, and how best to react to this new idea. Logic breaks the slave mentality of do what you're told. When we have logic, we are able to question what we are told, and more importantly, reject those who are shown to be liars. If we blindly accept everything we are told, we are led around by the nose by people who do think for themselves.
And never forgetting also that there is this other unseen hand that knows absolutely what consciousness is, who are experts in that fact. You're walking around couldn't care less. You're waiting for the next movie to come out, the next fashion and all that, what Hollywood's going to do next. But there's people there who have a thorough understanding of human consciousness, human psyche, human libido, and they're working on it 24/7 to feather their own nests and also to keep man in servitude.
When we think for ourselves, we can get ahead of the curve and become independent of a world gone mad. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time that the state can shield the people from the political, economic, or military consequences of the lie. Thus, it becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Joseph Goebbels.
I'm deeply troubled that a very vague, emotionally stated, semi-theologically defined diagnosis of the central global menace is obscuring our national ability to comprehend the historically unprecedented challenge which is being posed in our time by a massive global political awakening, and thus is obstructing our ability to deal effectively with the global political turmoil that this awakening is generating.
Using logic allows you to respond on an intellectual level and not an animalistic emotional level. Every good marketeer knows that the most powerful motivator to use is irrational fear. It is what drives the impulse buy. Every sale derives off of irrational fear of not being fashionable or having the latest and greatest gadget, or that missing out on a deal, or that they're going to run out. Logic would dictate that they're blowing out the old because a new product, which is probably better and cheaper, is coming out and they can't afford to keep the older model around. Or that they're never really going to run out because they're in the business of mass producing things. Marketing is simply the manipulation of people for the profits and power of others.
The low self-esteem success chance is the conclusion that you want your prospect to have, which says, well, these guys are smart and I'm retarded. Oh, actually, that's not the exact one, but let's say they have that conclusion A. These guys are smart, I'm retarded, I can't do it. But if I could just do 1/10 as much as they do, then this would definitely be worth it, right? You ever had that rationalization in your mind? Like, well, I'm over here telling you about doing $10 million and whatever a day, 360 grand in 9 minutes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you ever think to yourself, well, Jesus, if I could just do like a little bit of that, I would be stoked. Not to say you guys all have low self-esteem, although every single person in the world does, which you should be happy about because you can prey on it like an evil. Never mind. Anyway. So that's what you want, right? Prey on it like an evil. You can prey on it like an evil. You can prey on it like an evil.
It's a 58-story building, although if you ask Mr. Trump how tall it is, it's actually 68. He skipped 10 floors in the numbering system.
Because of my genius, okay?
Because it's much more exciting to live on the 55th floor than it is on the 45th floor. It drove the fire department absolutely crazy because they lost 10 floors in the building that they couldn't find.
Because of my genius, okay?
This is salesmanship, and Trump knows how to do it better than anybody.
By the way, if anyone here is in advertising or marketing, kill yourself.
As you and I were discussing, it's become the #1 attraction in New York, the Trump Tower.
You try. You do what you can. Kill yourself.
Best hotel casino anywhere in the world.
Seriously, though, if you are, do.
The biggest gross in the history of the gaming business.
There's no rationalization for what you do, and you are Satan's little helpers.
Said to be the greatest yacht in the world.
Okay? Kill yourself. Seriously.
The finest transportation operation anywhere in this country.
You're the ruiner of all things good.
The largest building privately financed ever built in the world.
You are Satan's spawn.
The biggest selling book, or one of them, of the decade.
Filling the world with bile and garbage.
The best apartments in the world.
You are fucked and you are fucking us.
This has really turned out to be almost mystical. It's been great.
Kill yourself. It's the only way to save your fucking soul.
Because of my genius. Okay.
Memorization and regurgitation of ideas is brainwashing. Critical thinking is freedom. How can we solve problems created by soundbite politics with more soundbites? We need logic to understand and to process the logical outcomes of these proposals. Instead, we get Operation Mockingbird type politics where talking points are crafted and then repeated throughout our media. Those that are most skilled at repeating those points are considered the most intelligent.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now, we're looking at that very carefully.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to two American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
The slave mentality revolves around a two-step thinking process, input and output. The trivium revolves around the three-step process, input, processing, and output. The processing of information is our freedom. And the elites seek to corrupt our input through secrecy and censorship. They seek to limit your freedom of processing ideas by either force or distraction. But ultimately, we cannot be allowed to make the same decision the elite would make if presented with the same set of facts. If you can perfect this three-step process of critical thinking, your mind is freed, and all knowledge can be learned with ease. More importantly, with this logical thought process, you are inoculated against predatory thought control of those that seek to manipulate you and take advantage of you. This logical thought process is completely devoid in our modern education system. By not questioning the ideas leads to not questioning authority, which serves the elite who created the system. We could encourage the best qualities of youthfulness, curiosity, adventure, resilience, the capacity for surprising insights simply by being more flexible about time, text, and tests, by introducing kids to truly competent adults and giving each student whatever autonomy he or she needs in order to take the risk every now and then. But we don't do that. John Taylor Gatto. This trivium thought process of logical thought feeds naturally into humans' innate curiosity. Once fully grasped, learning becomes addictive and almost insatiable. You can literally feel your brain growing and firing faster. Your world becomes less scary because you are confident that you can overcome any challenge. The elite that control our paradigm do not want critically thinking humans that would question their world and ultimately question them in the systems of control.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.